It is recording.
So we are ready to go ahead and get launched. Yeah. I was just thinking. I always get confused when we start the recording before I give the code word, but I guess you added that out later, is my understanding. So
correct.
Welcome, everybody. We're glad you are here in this busy season for those of us who are in the church as Easter approaches. But we're really happy to welcome two of our stars, two of our stalwarts who've been part of this network for a while. I had the great pleasure of being trained with both Mary Lynn and Chip at the Auburn training program. And I know I've known Chip for a bit longer, back to our seminary days in Princeton. Mary Lynn is a coach who has her own company called Giacoso Coaching. And right now, what's making her smile a lot is the fact that she's going to be closer to her grandchild out in Colorado. So they're in the process of moving out there to embark on that new adventure of life together. And Chip is serving as a co-pastor with his wife Tammy at First Pres in Yorktown, New York, and he has a coaching practice called Compass Coaching. So very wonderfully qualified folks, deeply care about our network, and we're looking forward to hearing here today. So Chip, Mary Lynn, take it away.
All right.
Great. So Mary Lynn and I are happy to share with you all today a tool that we've been using for a while in our coaching practice, the Core Values Index. It's something that has been of particular value for me in helping to build a coaching relationship with people and sort of lay some groundwork. And so we appreciate the opportunity to share it with you and you know, put it in conversation with how we coach people. So Mary Lynn, did you have anything you wanted to?
No, let's just go right in. There's so much to describe today. Lots of good stuff.
So then I'm going to jump into what the Core Values Index is, and but I want to say that along the way, if you have questions, thoughts you want to clarify, I will be happy for Mary Lynn to answer all of your questions. So just want to put that out there.
And if you all do want to ask a question, please unmute yourself. In order to do that, I've muted everybody except our speakers.
Thank you. So one of the reasons that I particularly like the Core Values Index is that it comes out of a particular background or a particular focus of psychology called positive psychology. And it was developed by a person named Lynn Taylor, who had a career with IBM, and later sort of tried to take some of what he knew from his computer background and apply it to working with people and trying to help them find the best way and for them to make a meaningful and purposeful contribution in life and in work. I've never heard him actually say it, but I think he may have had some religious ministerial background at some point too, but I'm not sure of that. So what Lynn tried to do was to come up, take the different parts of his life and bring them together into this assessment tool that helps people understand who they are and then live out of who they are in a way that helps them make a very, I think, a meaningful and purposeful contribution to life and work. And so, Mary Lynn, since you have the power to change slides.
There we go.
So the basic premise of the Core Values Index starts with this with who we are, and because of the influence of positive psychology, this who we are, especially with the work of Maslow, the belief is that there is this innate, unchanging quality to who we are, that in the self, and that very sense of who we are is what we want to get to know. And so instead of starting with what's wrong with the person, if we can get to know what is innate and unchanging in our nature, then, and we can be in touch with that and live out of that, then we can be more productive. We can make contributions that are meaningful. We can even be more profitable in the kind of work we do. And so at its core, the mission of the Core Values Index is to answer this sort of archetypal question of who am I? And so when we get to know who we are and we contribute out of who we are, it changes the way in which we focus ourselves. So instead of just getting to know our personality, the what we are, we want to go deeper than that. And get to know this sort of innate, unchanging nature of ourselves. Personality then becomes the delivery mechanism and the delivery system for who we are. And so from the Core Values Index standpoint, I can be an introvert or an extrovert in the room, and I'm still delivering who I am. I can at times be more perceptive, or I can be more judging on the Myers-Briggs scale and still be delivering who I am. And so the key piece to remember in this is that whatever way I am present in a room, my personality is delivering who I am. And if we can get in touch with who we are, and our personality delivers who we are with intention and awareness, then we can make a meaningful and purposeful contribution for the unknown quantity of time that we have. Mary Lynn.
So Lynn says, sort of bases this index on two axioms. What we don't know about ourselves controls us is the first one. And that's one of the reasons we have inventories like this in Myers-Briggs and all kind of career inventories and those kinds of things to help us to understand ourselves better, because we can only really make conscious choices about things that we are conscious of. And if we don't know what the limits are on our abilities to work with teams or to do the work that we have been assigned to do, then we're going to live very frustrating kinds of lives. So in a way, any kind of instrument helps us to become conscious, and we want to continue to increase a basic understanding of our basic nature and the behaviors that we practice. The second axiom is that what we don't know about others impacts the quality of our relationships with them. So some of us are reasonably aware, but we may not know and sufficiently understand the people that we interact with in the workplace. And in those cases, our communications will falter, and goals and objectives will be overshadowed by battles for control. And all kinds of general misunderstandings can arise, which I know you are all aware of and have experienced for yourselves. So what he says is that we are wired from birth with different essential modes of operation. So the CVI is not about an adapted personality. It's about your basic spiritual nature, that nature that you were born with. It's not something that changes over time. In fact, this inventory or this index has the highest reliability or repeatability score of any index there is out there. So if you take it a year from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's going to turn out the same way. It doesn't change in middle age like like Myers-Briggs does. So it helps us to know our spiritual nature, because that nature strongly influences how and why we choose to experience life and how we are motivated to be at work, in a room, or with people in our social lives. But because we're creatures that adapt, we become slightly or significantly warped away from our most natural self. So when we're children, we live the way that we're naturally geared to live, but if that doesn't agree with the way our parents think we should be living, or those who are nurturing us and taking care of us, they will warp us unconsciously away from our given nature, and we will learn how to operate in other ways. But learning how to operate is different than having an innate nature that motivates us to operate in some ways. So we will, if we learn that if we operate out of our own natural nature, then we're going to experience some pain in our lives because people will punish us for not going along with whatever the program is. So the goal is to know the values that we hold as our core values nature, to understand the various strategies that come from these core values, and then to decide consciously which core value strategy is going to be most effective in the current situation.
So at its fullest form, to see the kind of the big picture, what you see on your screen right now is the map that is the Core Values Index. And for those of you who can't see it, it's 4 quadrants. And if you and when you get to see it, you'll notice that all 4 quadrants have a title. They all have a core value. They're all each core value is catalyzed by something. They all have a conflict strategy, a learning style, and a contribution to teams. And so what we want to do is we want to kind of break down this map and show you the different parts of it. Now, reality is, you know, nobody walks around and says, hey, I'm a builder or I'm a merchant. But it's like going to Starbucks. You have to learn the lingo in order to order a cup of coffee. So for us, the sort of 4 core values that are important in this are power, love, wisdom, and knowledge. And sometimes I go back and forth. Sometimes I'll say builder, and sometimes I'll say power, or sometimes I'll say innovator, and sometimes I say wisdom. We're talking about the same quadrant and the same core value, but sometimes the lingo just gets back and forth. One thing I would sort of focus on, I would add to what Mary Lynn said about the core values. The index is not thinking about core values in the way that a business, for instance, might say, you know, we will be hospitable or we will be friendly. Core value here are the 4 essential human energies that motivate people to make a contribution at their best. And this is what we live out of. This is what we are made with. This is what the 4 core values are. We each have a unique recipe of them. So we're not just talking about something that we want to be. We're talking from the standpoint of the Core Values Index. This is who we are. This is who we were created to be. And just on a theological note, if my sense of the Core Values Index is that if we are the presence of, if we are being power, love, wisdom, and knowledge in some created way, we could also theologically say that God is power, love, wisdom, and knowledge at God's core. And so if we're living out of who we are living out of who God made us to be, or out of the image of God. And so in some ways, there's a deeply spiritual piece to this. The Core Values Index does not make that claim that this is your image of God, but I think there's something spiritual and deeply important to think about in what this is offering to people. So the four core values themselves, builder, merchant, innovator, and banker, they come out of a time, the words were chosen intentionally, they come out of a time prior to the Industrial Revolution. At the Industrial Revolution, we began to measure people and value people based on their productivity. This tried to go before that and look at society and how people contributed to relationships and to groups. And so the builders were the people who caused things to happen. The merchants were the connectors, the people who caused free trade to happen. And the innovators created things. And the bankers were the conservators of society. So taking this approach that people made a contribution to community or made a contribution to relationships, the core values index began to see the connection between those contributions and these four essential human energies that make up who we are. And so what we want to do is sort of break down each quadrant and walk you through what each is saying about what each of these essential energies would be.
So we're going to take turns on these four different motivations, core values. One of the ways it's been explained to me is that we all have gas in our tanks. We have gas in our tanks for builder. We have a tank that is a merchant. We have a tank of gas that's an innovator, and there's a tank of gas that's a banker. We all have energy in all of those gas tanks, but we tend to have more gas in one or two or three of them than the other. So we all have all of these qualities, but our recipe is what we tend to act out of and what motivates us the most. I'm going to take a little bit more time on the builder value because once you see how this works, all of the rest of them work the same way. They just differ in how, in the content of it. So the builder is someone who walks into a room and wants to be seen as the most powerful person in the room and wants to be the most powerful person in the room. And by power, it's this is not about trying to grasp power like we see people do all the time, but this is about having the ability to take action and to inspire other people to take action. So if you have a team of people and you don't have anybody on the team that is a builder, you're going to talk a lot about dreams and you might count things a lot, but you might not get anywhere. So builders are really important to a team as they are to each of us individually. So this is the kind of power that really contributes, and it's used very well when it gets action, when it gets things done. Power in itself doesn't really have a need to connect. It's a very different kind of energy than folks who have a lot of energy around relationship. It is catalyzed by what we say is faith, meaning that I have faith that I can make a difference, that I will be able to step up to the plate and make some things happen. So the builder contributes action and results to the team, often decisiveness, and inspires a team to never give up. But when someone who has this power energy starts to have the experience of failure or people who don't have faith in him or her, then they start to lose faith in themselves. And then they lose their confidence about that gift of power that they have, and they start to get anxious. And anxiety is the key negative catalyst in the way these core values work. Once we start to become anxious about our core nature, that it's being accepted or that we are acting out of that core nature, we start to worry about, am I becoming the opposite of what I truly am? Am I acting in ways that don't belong to me? Am I, and in the builder's case, am I really impotent? Am I weak instead of being powerful the way I feel that I was born to be? So we start to become fearful, and with that fear at work, then we start losing that power. We lose the pure power of making things happen. And so we are clinging to that feeling of having power. And so we try to find that same feeling again by being powerful in not so positive ways. So now we start to become intimidating to others. We can become overbearing or arrogant or bossy or consider ourselves to be always right. Sometimes a builder will start to ridicule others or point the finger or blow up friendships. They're willing to risk just about anything in order to regain control and that feeling of being powerful in a positive way. And now the builder is no longer contributing to the team, but is trying to get something back from the team. They're trying to get back that feeling of being powerful, and they're doing it in a really negative way. So each of these core values, each of us have contributions to the team, and we also have things that take away from the team. And that's how all of these different categories work. We have a way of being, we have a way of being confident in who we are and wanting to feel like other people acknowledge that and see that in us. But when we start to feel like that's not being seen or acknowledged, or we're not seeing it ourselves, then we start trying to come up with ways to get that sense back that we are who we are. And that's when it turns negative. So let's move on to the, oops, I already said that one. Merchant.
So in my experience with the merchant, most pastors, in my experience, are either merchants or innovators. And so I find it really interesting to be able to talk about being a merchant, because that was my highest core value. The core value here for the merchant is being the presence of love. And it's really important to remember that this is about being love, not just doing loving things. So, but what love is not being a doormat. It's not always being the giver without any reciprocation. It's certainly not always being the extrovert or the life of the party, or pretending to be happy. Love is my deepest commitment to work toward an inspired vision within myself and other people. Love wants to show up and connect with people and the environment. It's often been said that the love-based person is the feng shui person of the four core values, because they notice the room, they notice how it's set up, they notice where people are sitting, because they have a strong sense of relationship. And so when in order for love to be ignited, if we think of it in terms of an energy, love is catalyzed by, come on the screen, by truth. And truth here has to do with seeing the way things are. It's about an honest, truthful exchange back and forth between people or in groups. And when that happens, think of catalyst like your chemistry set, your chemistry class. A catalyst is something that ignites something else without becoming the thing that it ignites. And so truth here when there's truth in the relationship, when there's a good exchange back and forth, truth as a catalyst is going to ignite love, which is going to create and inspire visions, build relationships And it's going to nurture not only the core values in the person who is the presence of love, but it's also going to nurture the core values in other people as well. And what often happens is that amazing visions, for instance, begin to happen. And I think this is why pastors are often merchant-based people, because pastors do things like stand behind communion tables and say they will come from east and west and north and south and sit at the table in God's kingdom. That's a vision. And when we have good exchanges about the way things are, truth ignites that kind of vision. Now, like Marilyn said, you know, if you think in terms of a dimmer switch, when truth begins to dim, and the exchange back and forth doesn't feel very inspirational any longer, what happens is that, according to the index, anxiety begins to rise in us. And the anxiety is not the DSM diagnosis of anxiety. It's the natural born warning system that we have within us that is trying to tell us something. And I would offer that it's probably trying to tell us one of two things. Either who we're showing up as is not needed in the relationship or the room right now, or what I'm offering and who I am is not being honored. Either way, the anxiety is the flag that says you need to pay attention, something's not working right here. And if we can listen to it, what the index allows us to do and invites us to do is to choose. Do I need to keep being who I am as this essential energy, or do I need to shift and be present differently? Either way, if we don't listen to that anxiety, we move into our deepest fear. And our deepest fear is that we're the opposite of who we know ourselves to be. And in this case, the opposite of love, is fear that I am not love, that there is no love in me, that I'm the opposite of who I know myself to be as a loved-based person. And in this place, my experience, whether it's personal or working with other people, is that loved-based people can be some of the most angry, harsh people at times. And I think it's because love-based people feel the breach of a broken relationship deeply. And so if a merchant ends up living out of their deepest fear, it's not that they stop relating to people, it's that they relate through a conflict strategy. And in this case, the conflict strategy for the love-based person is manipulation. I will manipulate the room, I will manipulate the relationship, I will manipulate the group so that I get what I take and get what I need at the expense of other people, rather than making a contribution. I will be the person who shows up as love even when nobody else in this room is loving. I will put on love rather than contribute it for the inspiration and nurturing of core values in other people. I would just add to that, one of the things that I love about the Core Values Index generally is that it's got this learning style, and each quadrant, each core value has a learning style, and maybe it's goes hand in hand that, pastors, for instance, as loved-based people, have one of their two top qualities. The learning style here is to talk and listen. I notice in myself at times that people will say, hey, have you read this book? And I'll say, no, I haven't read this book. And they'll say, oh, well, once you've read it, then let's talk. And I'll say, we could have a conversation right now and you could tell me what's important about it to you. And then we could see what we generate together, rather than you waiting for me to get to a book that I'm probably not going to read. So why don't we have the conversation? Because that's what I love to do, to learn how to learn what you know and see what we can learn together. And in the end, I think it also speaks to the contributions that the merchants love to make. Through that talking and listening, through being the presence of love, they make their contribution to teams are relationships and vision. And that's really important as a contribution to how healthy those relationships and the vision can be when they can be themselves.
Okay, so we're going to move on to innovator now. And innovators, the core value is wisdom, which you might note if you're seeing this slide, that it's wisdom is seeing the way things are and discerning what to do about it. Wisdom is not about being the smartest person in the room, and it's not about taking something that's complex and making it more complex. It's the linchpin of all problem solving. And they do that by being curious. That's their contribution, by being curious and offering their curiosity to others. So innovators have a lot of compassion, that is being with people, which nurtures that curiosity. When I'm genuinely curious and I want to understand, I'm remaining open and I'm asking questions. I can be sort of like a journalist. So these are the folks who make conception of design and the design of products possible. Innovators rarely are going to be willing to give up on solving a problem or finding a solution, whether it's a mechanical solution or it's a relational solution. They're extremely patient. They will continue to work on the problem, and they want to be admired and appreciated for the fact that they have this wisdom and share it with others. They love having an audience around to appreciate them. And I remember when, this is a number of years ago, but John Stewart went off to Egypt for, I don't know how long, a summer, a year, some period of time. And he came back and he said the thing that he really missed was he missed the audience. So he had nobody to be wise with or to show off his wisdom to. And I think not knowing the language probably didn't help that for him. My son is an innovator, and he will not give up on a problem and loves to come up with solutions. So for these folks, I tend to think of them as that finding solutions is their way of playing. It's their fun time, is when they get to be working on a problem. So my son used to work for a big software development company, and he would be with his team, and they'd all be sitting around a table in a conference room. They'd have their laptops open, and they'd be working on solving some problem. And he said what would happen would be they would get to the end, they would figure out what they were going to do next, and people start shutting up their laptops, and my son would say, but wait, we could do it this way. Mm-hmm. So for him, he just wanted to stay there and come up with new solutions, because that's what makes him feel energized and gives him pleasure. Now, what happens if an innovator is no longer being, having the sense and the wisdom to be compassionate with others, if they're not able to remain empathetic, regardless of what other people are doing or saying, then they start to fear that they are becoming foolish, or they're being seen as foolish, and they become anxious. And now what that curiosity becomes is interrogation. So now they're asking questions, but not necessarily out of curiosity. Instead, they are leading the witness into providing the answer that they already think is right, or not being able to come up with the answer that the innovator feels that he or she already knows. So this curiosity turns to interrogation, and then that turns to embarrassing other people and makes them feel ignorant. So I remember myself engaging in that in a COM meeting one time, where I was asking another person with whom I deeply disagreed about something that they were bringing to the table, and I just started peppering them with questions, and I was doing it in a very loving way, but outwardly, but my insides didn't feel like that at all. I was trying to prove a point, and that's the innovator at work, is trying to get people to see them as wise and also to make their point. I think we're going to move on so we can keep on going here.
All right.
Chip.
So the last of the four quadrants, and the one that I scored the least on, is the banker, whose core value is knowledge. It's important when we think about this that, you know, the definition of knowledge here, being the presence of knowledge, is knowing the facts through research, measurement, proof, and records. It's about having this person loves to have a very clear data point that is going to make all the difference in the world. And the thing for me in life and in ministry and in coaching that I have had to learn about this person who, when this is their primary core value, is that this is not disassociated information to them. Being the presence of knowledge, even if it is having a clear data point that they can see that charts a course, they're presenting who they are. And so when they present who they are, when they present this information, there's something that has to be heard about them and not just the information itself. And so in order for knowledge to be ignited as an energy, it is catalyzed by justice. And the justice here that there is equity of access to the information. There's accountability to that information and compensation and opportunity based on that research and measurement and proof. The knowledge-based person believes that there is something about what they know that has a trajectory to it that leads in a certain direction. And that everybody should, that what they want to contribute is out of what they know and who they are, is that they believe, and that justice ignites this desire for everybody to have an equity of access to that information. And so when justice begins to dim, anxiety begins to rise, and that anxiety could be telling us some stuff. And if we don't listen to it, we move into our deepest fear, which is that I'm the opposite of knowledge. I don't know. I'm no longer being knowledge. I'm not being smart. I'm being ignorant. And in those moments, the person doesn't stop relating to other people. They just live out of their conflict strategy. And in this case, the conflict strategy is aloof judgment. And the best way that I can sort of help people picture this is that if you can imagine being in a room of people and one of those people have their arms crossed and their legs folded, or vice versa, however that looks, but they're just all kind of twisted up like a pretzel. And what they're saying with their body is, you do not have access to me, and you do not have access to what I know. And in that, they are taking and getting for themselves by affirming themselves as knowing stuff, but they're not giving it to the relationship or to the group as a contribution. This group of people loves to read and analyze stuff, and their contributions to teams. One of the things that I find really fascinating about this group is conservation and information are their contributions. This would have been the group of people prior to the Industrial Revolution who would have made sure that there was firewood by the fire at night. So when you wake up in the morning, you can conserve the fire and keep it going. These are the conservators of history, and they believe that history, that information, that knowledge points in a direction that the community needs to know in order to go somewhere, or the relationship or whatever. So what this leads us to is a few things that I think can be helpful in thinking about ways of knowing and that sort of thing. So generally speaking, the builder knows things purely intuitively. Builders are high-risk people, and you know when you're in conflict with a builder. They are overt in their conflict. On the opposite end of the swoosh that you see on the screen is the banker. Their style, their way of knowing is cognitive. And they are not risky people. In fact, it's not just low risk, there's no risk. And you know, their conflict is more covert. So if you think in terms of the person with their arms crossed and their legs folded, they're telling you by their body what they may not be able to speak out loud. The merchant, the love-based person, mostly know things intuitively, moderate risk, mostly overt conflict, and the innovator, the presence of wisdom, is more covert, is mostly cognitive in their knowing style, and low risk and mostly covert in their conflict. Before we go on from this, there's some secondary benefits to the Core Values Index, and one of them is that when you look at a chart like this, it opens up conversations about conflict. A builder who knows what to do and is ready to go do it is going to be in conflict with an innovator who wants to ask a lot of questions and be curious. The builder's like, just give me the hammer, I'll go hammer the nail at the Habitat house, just get out of the way, I get it. But the innovator might want to ask 20 questions and go, well, where are we going to put the wood, and how are we going to set that window, and what's the height of things, in a way that puts them in conflict. And that's true. There's opportunities to think about, why is it that I'm in conflict with somebody else in the way that they're being present in the room, that the index sort of opens up for further conversation that we can't fully get into today, but becomes a real gift for the ways in which groups interact with one another, and gives the groups the opportunity to say, maybe that's why I'm not honoring the report of somebody and they're getting mad, but what I'm really not honoring in the banker is them. And I think this is what gives some opportunities for further conversation in relationships and groups.
Sorry about that, Chip.
No, it's all right.
So we want to talk a little bit about what your scores mean, or the size of your squares on your whatever you received from Taylor Protocols to demonstrate what your profile looks like if you went and took the Core Values Index, because this is the really cool stuff. If you had one of these CVI ladders and you had the points that you have, the number of degrees of your energy in each of these 4 tanks, you would place those scores on this ladder and it would look like this. So here's somebody whose highest score is wisdom, their next highest score is knowledge, and then power, and then way down there is love. The merchant is way down at the bottom. So as you look at these numbers, you want to think about a Richter scale with an earthquake. And you know that the difference between 1 and 2 on the Richter scale is like 10 times more energy. So if a 4.0 earthquake comes along, you can maybe feel it a little bit if you're really close, but a 7.0 earthquake, which is only 3 points higher, right, is hugely more destructive. So it's greater, much greater than in magnitude than that little 3-point jump that it looks like. So if you have a difference on this CVI ladder that we're all looking at now, if we have it in front of us, is wisdom is the highest score of 24 and love is the lowest at 10. So that's 14 points of difference, and every 3 points is an order of magnitude of 1. So if you divide 14 by 3, you're going to get 8, right? 8 degrees of magnitude. So it takes a ton more energy for someone who's an innovator with a score of 24 to use the energy of a merchant of love it's almost impossible for them to reach down that far and try to use that kind of energy in what they're doing. But these energies, to some degree, are accessible to all of us, as we said at the beginning, and they can really help when we get into conflict situations, because if we are conscious of what's happening to us, if we become aware of the anxiety that's arising in us because we're not feeling like we are who we believe ourselves to be and know ourselves to be, or we're not feeling like others are seeing us in that way, that anxiety arises. And so we start to revert to this conflict strategy. In the case of the innovator, it's the opposite of curiosity. Now I can't remember what the term is.
Wisdom.
What is it?
Wisdom? Is that what you're?
No, no. The innovator. Yeah, the innovator starts asking people questions just to feel good themselves.
Oh,
that was
interrogation.
Yeah, interrogation. Yeah, we start working with a different sort of the negative way of behaving in order to try to feel that way. Instead, what we could do, if we're conscious of all of this, is we can move to another strategy that we have enough energy for, that we can use that strategy if we pay attention to it. So as Chip is about to say, but I'm going to say it for him, leadership, according to Taylor, is a function of shifting to the most effective energy at the moment and staying there long enough for others around you to accommodate themselves to it. And I think we'll probably get to some of that if we talk about how we have used this in our coaching. Here's that definition of, we want to have opportunity for you to ask questions, so I'm rushing through some of this a little bit. It's a function of shifting into the most effective energy at the moment, which is not going to be your negative strategy, your conflict strategy, and then staying in that energy long enough for those around you to accommodate themselves to it. So let me give you an example from coaching that I've had, and then I'm sure Chip will have one as well. I had a young woman who had been trying for a very long time to get a raise at where she worked. She worked in a college and was I don't remember what she did. Anyway, she was having no luck at all. And she was a high merchant. And so what she did was she just kept doing the same thing over and over again, trying to make sure she was in her boss's good graces and, be chummy with him and tell him, what great work he was doing and make sure he knew what she was doing and just be the best employee that she could be, but nothing was working. And so we looked at her CVI, and she had enough of a banker score that she could think of times that she had accessed that ability to use knowledge. And so I said, well, what would a banker do if a banker was looking for a raise? What might a banker do to approach this person? What kinds of things can a banker do that maybe it's not your first go-to strategy, but that you could do? How can you do that? And she said, well, I could do something with numbers. And so she came up with the idea, which is not a brilliant idea by any stretch, but for a merchant, it is a hard thing to do, of putting things together that displayed, that demonstrated what people in her field were getting in the area, in the kind of institution that she was in. And that's what she took to her boss the next time, and what she was, asking for a raise. But she had numbers to give him. Mm-hmm. And that convinced him then to give her the raise that she had been seeking for all of this time. Loving him to death was not going to get her anywhere. But she could use that banker score, because that banker energy, because she had just enough to do it. Chip?
Yeah, I'm just two coaching moments have come to mind. One is I'm coaching a millennial right now who is just graduated with his engineering degree, and he is an innovator, and he's finding it very frustrating the speed at which the operations and process in his company works. And what has struck me in our conversations is that he so wants to be the innovator that he doesn't know how to be present in his work differently. And yet his second core value is happens to also be in the presence of love. And so we've talked in terms of like, what would it look like to be, to do the creative things, to do the problem solving stuff that you love doing at the work. And when you don't have that, what's the opportunity to shift and be present differently with the people in your room, in your department, that might open up some different ways of making a contribution or being present to people differently, and seeing how that both is a contribution for you, but also how it feeds you. So that's one that comes to mind.
Great. So we want to give some time for you to ask questions and also share insights that you may have had. This is a lot of information that we have thrown at you in a very short period of time. I mean, you can take a day doing a core values index workshop. But we wanted to give you a taste of what it's like and why we're so, Chip and I are both pretty enthusiastic about using this tool in our coaching. So what has come up for you as we've been talking?
This is Rich Hansen. The four categories seem fairly familiar with the DISC. I'm interested to know what you think the pros and cons are between the two.
They're very different, is my first response. The DISC is a strengths finder kind of thing, right? What are your abilities? Is that right? I don't use the DISC.
It's abilities, but it's also style. So for example, in the DISC, there would be someone very similar to the banker who is interested in the data. There would be someone similar to the merchant who's interested in relationships, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I would say that what's different is that this is not so much about abilities, it's about where you are coming from in the world. What's important to you, and what's important to you, and what's important for you to be able to contribute in a positive way in the world. So you could have all different kinds of gifts. Merchants can have gifts of working with spreadsheets. It's actually possible for some, but that's not what moves them. Working with figures is not going to energize them unless that's a secondary energy that they have. I don't know, Chip, how would you explain that?
Well, I think every assessment comes at this from a different approach. One of the things that to me that this speaks to is sort of these are human energies. This is about being the presence of something. And I don't know enough about DISC to speak at all authoritatively, but some of my impressions of other assessment tools is that there's a lot of sort of choice that is given to the person to say, well, I'm this or I'm that. And I'm not always sure that's how that's who I am versus that's who I want to be gets distinguished. And but I don't really know enough about DISC to sort of speak to much comparison.
On the chat feature, in case she doesn't ask it, Janice asked, do you each have the client, or do you have each client take the survey when you start coaching them?
I don't do it with all of them, but some of them, yes.
I try to do it as much as possible, and I try to use this as a sort of a starting point. I'm very clear with them that I do not, in the end, want people to think that the core values index is the end all be all. But I think it sort of, first of all, builds a good relationship. It allows people to enter in softly into coaching, and unless they need to just dive into something immediately, but we can build a relationship together with it. There's also some good awareness raising exercises to follow up on the assessment that gives the people the ability to sort of live with these ideas, and just pay attention, and become more mindful of how they live and how they interact. And then that opens up coaching opportunities, that then what I have found with the people who do it first is it then informs the goals that they bring to coaching, and can be a tool that they will refer back to, but not necessarily. The other thing I've found for groups, just real quickly, is in coaching some people in groups. One person that I did this with said in a church setting, said, I think what those 4 core values opens up is, when we write a stewardship letter, we should write 4 stewardship letters, because the learning style for people to understand what makes giving important is different for each of the quadrants. And so it becomes a way to communicate with people with who they are, or who, and maybe we don't hit who they are with the first letter, because everybody gets the same letter, but maybe by the 3rd letter, we will hit the innovators as well. So
I have a question. My question is about the Enneagram, which I am certified to teach in and use that a lot. And I don't know if you all have any comments about how the Enneagram overlays this or helps you, or what. So I was listening through the Enneagram lens to each of these 4 quadrants, and that was a very fascinating experience, actually.
It sounds like you were able to make some connections.
Yes.
I don't know that I mean, I've done the Enneagram, but I'm not certified to teach in it. So I'm sure you could probably share more about that than either one of us could.
I have begun to get to look more deeply into the Enneagram, and I agree with you. I think there are some really valuable connections, and sort of similar starting points from what I can understand so far.
Right.
Chip, I had a question related to teams, and it's more in terms of, have either of you had experience using this with a group or a congregational group, and seeing how the functioning of that particular group changes as they come to understand the core values of the other group members? Any particular input along those lines?
Well, so since I have my foot in 2 worlds, one as a coach and one as a pastor, I decided to use my own session as a guinea pig for this. And
Guinea pigs.
yeah, and one of the first things I did was, when we got together and talked about it, I asked all the people whose primary core value was the same to get together. And it was interesting to sort of break them up into 4 places around the room, and they talked really well to each other. But then I asked them to sort of, look diagonally, like the core values index map, and say, now who might you be in conflict with, and can you figure out why? And it opened up then, for people to kind of go find who they feel some conflict with at times, and to sort of talk about their approach to things. And so it opened up some conversations that I found really helpful for how we function as a session. And by the way, to me, this is a great way to sort of have people work through conflict and both think about who they're approaching a question as, but also, to ask when I'm moderating, is there something we need to shift and be different about on this conversation? So.
There were a couple of follow-up questions also by chat. And Janice asked Mary Lynn, how do you decide which clients it would be most helpful to have take the CVI?
I'm trying to answer another question on here. So,
oh, sorry.
How do I decide? Oh, yeah, I don't know. It's just an intuitive thing. I use it a lot as just the very first thing that we do in most cases. And then, we see whether the person sort of resonates to it or not. But they usually do, because it's such helpful information. With ministers, since so many of us are merchants and innovators, I find it helpful if the person has enough of builder energy, looking at their core values index, the ladder there that I showed you. That can be really helpful in a session that is not moving forward at all. Is to help them come in and say, we're not going to just talk about this anymore now. We've made this decision, we're going to move forward, and then leave it that way, and don't be concerned about people chatting about, oh my gosh, she was so different at this meeting. Stay as the builder, don't go back to being a merchant, and that'll break through and things can move on forward. So I just wanted to mention that, just because so many of us are merchants, and that can be an issue if we don't have a secondary builder energy. Kathy asked, how can we get access to the test? Just shoot us, either one of us, Chip or I can help you with that. Just shoot us an email and we'll get that information to you.
Well, I think if I may, Kathy's question, the way I read it was, if we wanted to use this, as coaches with clients, how I'm assuming maybe there's some training that you go through in order to be able to offer this, and I would be curious to know, how extensive that is, how much it costs, and then also what's the cost to you or to your client for each assessment.
Right. So if you want, go ahead, Chip.
Oh, I was going to say that it is a proprietary tool. So we had to pay for training on it. And I think that was, I've been doing this for 5 years or more. So I think it was somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500, something like that. I don't, and then each assessment is $50. For that we can charge. There's a second level of a person can be trained in giving the assessment, but not be the fully certified people that we are. But they would need to be related to a certified person. So, like, we can work with people who want to give it, but don't want to go through the full training. So they would have to work through us to have access to the tool. It's not that we present the tool to people necessarily. It's just that we provide the means to it, is sort of more of a partnership. But generally speaking, the tool itself is $50 for the full report. The people who took it through my account did not get the full report, which includes some numbers, and I'm not sure whether you got to see the video or not. And then usually there's like a 15-page report that goes with it as well. That is more information than you can work through in even 3 sessions. So.
Yeah. I had one more really important thing to say. Now I can't remember what it was. So. I will come back to it later if I think of it.
And I'm going to suggest that if you've been being polite, holding back on your question, this is the time, because we've got just another 2 to 3 minutes max.
Oh, okay. I thought we were over. Woo.
You are, but I don't have a lot of announcements.
I've I've been rushing along. Okay, let me dig in my head and see what it was I was going to say.
You know, while she's thinking about it, just another follow-up to Mitch's question. You know, I think there's a tendency in any kind of group to find a lot of people who are like-minded, and sometimes you need that for problem solving, for instance, as as innovators. But the problem with innovators is that they're really good at multiple solutions. They're not necessarily good at taking and implementing one of those solutions. And so this really invites the opportunity to sort of think about, how is this group really organized or inclusive of the 4 quadrants, so that you can get the most out of people and their contribution. The banker may say, the trajectory of this church has been along this line for the last 50 years. And the merchant may come along and say, well, let's make a left turn. And that's going to raise the anxiety of the banker. But on the other hand, there's a good conversation to have there to understand, well, why have you been that way for 50 years? And what would a left turn look like for us now? And it creates some really good possibilities, I think, for for both helping people talk to one another and think and invite people to contribute in some pretty powerful ways.
Well, I would really like to thank Chip and Mary Lynn for a really informative session. I'd also say, if other people have questions, if you know Chip and Mary Lynn's email, then by all means get in touch with them. If not, you can send additional questions to info@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org, and we will make sure that they get those questions. So thank you for the information, and especially for helping us to think about ways that we can use this in our coaching and help our clients use it in their ministry practice.
Good. Well, glad to have the opportunity.
If you would like to...
Marilyn, I typed in my email address in the text box. I don't know if that would be helpful if you want
I
to do
saw
this.
it. I threw mine in there. Yeah.
Great.
If you would like to receive a resource development CCU for renewal of your ICF credential, then please send the opening word and the closing word that I'll give you in a moment to certificate@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org, certificate@presbyteriancoachnetwork.org. And I would ask you please to do that as soon as possible, like right after you hang up, or at least in the next 24 hours. It really helps to be able to do the certificates all together and not have them dribbling in over time. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you. I'm really excited about our next 2 learning calls next month on May 9th. Our own Cindy Thomas and Brian Smith, they've been doing some very innovative coaching work. I know they have a different title, but it involves shadow coaching around the shadow. And that's something that I personally don't know a lot about, so I'm really looking forward to learning from them. And then on June 13th, some of us know Phil Berge, either from work he's done for some of our synods, or perhaps if we went through the Auburn or now Columbia training programs, Phil is on the faculty. And Phil, this is actually a response to Roy's question a couple of months ago, when Roy said, I thought that we were really going to hear in this presentation that Chris did about the impact of coaching on systems. So Phil Berge is going to present on the impact of coaching on systems on June 13th.
Thank you, Jen.
A last word from anybody that's the needful or helpful? Then thank you all.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Chip and Mary Lynn.
Sure. Thanks for setting us up.
May there be new life and resurrection in these next couple of weeks. And we'll see you in May.
Amen.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.